Hey, thanks so much for finding the video. Do us a favor. If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe. And be sure to leave your comment. We love to interact. Enjoy the video. You probably saw the report over the weekend. Adam Rittenberg, who, if you're not familiar with Adam Rittenberg, he covers the Big Ten for ESPN. So Adam Rittenberg, so based in the Midwest, reporting that Daronte Jones is interviewing to be the LSU offensive or defensive coordinator. Admittedly, I had to do a lot of research here on Daronte Jones, as I'm sure many of you have also. So, a couple of things, just as a refresher. About this time last week, we were all expecting that Ryan Nielsen was going to be named LSU defensive coordinator. And as we've discussed, that fell through for a variety of different reasons. And it left LSU back at square one, where they had gone through their initial list of 6 candidates and were still empty-handed. So at that point, LSU sort of had to reassess, and as I understand it, they started receiving interest from outside, people contacting them saying, hey, would you be interested in talking to this coach? And as I was told late last week, that there was one coach that had really piqued their interest, very likely from the NFL, and my assumption here now is that that's Daronte Jones, who was in Baton Rouge on Sunday, according to Rittenberg, interviewing for that job in person. So there's a lot of pros and a few cons if this happens. So if we go through sort of the list, and first of all, it totally makes sense that if you're Daronte Jones, that you inquire about this job. He's an NFL position coach, and we kind of had the same conversation a week ago about Nielsen, right? From being an NFL position coach, if your desire is to advance your career and eventually become a head coach, it's really hard to do that from an NFL position coach. So if this were an opportunity to go from position coach to coordinator at the major college level, it puts you very much on everybody's radar, whereas 48 hours ago, did anybody really know the name Daronte Jones? I didn't. And I had to do a lot of digging today. People back at Franklin and Jeanerette, where he was a high school coach in Louisiana, Nichols when he was there in the early 2000s, to get a little bit of his background. Apparently just a grinder who went through the coaching, hierarchy as everybody kind of does, bounced job to job here to there, trying to advance, and now he's found himself in the NFL for the last 5 years and maybe looking to make this step to Baton Rouge. So it makes sense. He's trying to advance his career. Totally understand that. There's a lot I like. He's got experience at every level of football. He's coached high school football in Louisiana. He's coached at every level of college football, from being the GA at Lenoir-Rhyne to something called Bowie State, to Nichols and Hawaii and UCLA and Wisconsin. He's coached in the CFL, and he spent the last 5 years in the NFL with Cincinnati, Miami, and Minnesota for the past couple of seasons. Coming from a place in Minnesota that has been one of the best defensive franchises in the NFL since Mike Zimmer has been there. Now, this year was different, obviously, because they had a lot of injuries, but still really strong defensive culture with the Vikings. So he's got NFL experience, CFL experience at every level of college. He's got ties to Louisiana. He coached at Nichols, and he coached at 2 different stops at the Louisiana high school ranks. And something we've learned watching guys like Nick Saban at Alabama, or when you look at other coaches that have moved on to other parts of the country, if it's Les going to Kansas, or we saw Chevis Jackson and Mike New, guys like that go to Ball State. We've seen guys from this state go to different parts of the country, maintain their ties, and recruit here. So I have no doubt that Daronte Jones still has some connectivity within coaching circles in this state. So the fact that he's got experience, understands the culture, understands the importance of LSU to Louisiana, a lot of that makes sense. Something we've also talked about is that he is a minority. And whether you think that should matter or shouldn't, the thing that I'll say, and I don't think it should matter based on merit, but I will always be okay with people actively looking to diversify. Because, and not just to check boxes, but because a variety of opinions and people who come from different backgrounds can sometimes fill in your blind spots. And that happened to LSU last summer. Nobody really talks about this very openly, and I understand it. But there were a lot of internal issues within the program last summer after all of the civil unrest in our country. If it was staff members or players, I mean, it was a thing. I mean, you had players marching to the president's office last year. It was a legitimate thing internally. And I do think a more diverse staff that could, with the free flow exchange of ideas, could prevent things like that. So I do think that that's a positive. And you also have a guy here who's very clearly still looking to advance his career. It's the opposite of a situation like with Bo Pelini or Scott Linehan, guys that had collected seven-figure buyouts, maybe looking just to coast toward retirement. And now you got a guy that's still super hungry and looking to advance in his career, and I like that. So there's a big, long list of things that make sense about Daronte Jones. There's really two things that if I do the thing where you get the legal pad, draw the line down the middle, you put pros and cons, there's a big, long list of pros, which I just said, and there's two cons that I came up with. One is the fact that if you were looking for a guy that was a proven defensive coordinator, a guy who had been in that spot, he's not it. He has been a defensive coordinator before. I mentioned the two high school jobs he had at Franklin and at Jeanerette. He was a defensive coordinator at the high school level back in the early 2000s, 02, 03, and then was also a defensive coordinator and assistant head coach at Bowie State when he was there as well. But you're still talking about more than a decade, man. That's been more than a decade, and he's never done it at the highest level. So that's a strike. There's no way around that. That's a strike against him. And then there's the issue of Corey Raymond. Because everywhere that Daronte Jones has gone in his career, he's been a secondaries coach. And you've got the guy who is the patriarch of DBU in that spot. And a guy who, when you brought in Bill Bush, was very unhappy about that. And I know a lot of the feeling has been, I know Corey wants the DC job. Doesn't seem like he's going to get it. And what if you bring in another defensive backfields guy? Do you risk losing Corey? I'm not saying you pass on a really good defensive coordinator candidate to keep Corey Raymond happy, but I think you certainly have to do what you can to keep Corey Raymond here, because so many of those guys that you recruit are here because of Corey, because they love him and he's fantastic at what he does. Like the resume, I don't need to spell out the resume. Just look on Sundays. I mean, it's LSU guys left and right in the defensive backfield. I mean, it's All-American after All-American, first-round pick after first-round pick. Like, you just keep cycling through because Corey's done that. He deserves 100% of the credit. So you got to find a way to make sure that meshes. And I don't know how you do that. I'm not even going to pretend to know how you do that. If you divvy up responsibilities, if Daronte Jones could coach a different position, maybe he coaches defensive line or linebackers. I don't know. But that's something that would need to be addressed also. Anyway, I was told late last week that LSU had really zeroed in on a candidate, and apparently it was Jones. So they brought in Sunday for an interview, and we'll see how that went. You know, so many times we scratch our heads and wonder why guys don't get jobs, and sometimes guys just, when you meet them face to face, they fail an interview. It doesn't go great. There's a point of contention that's just hard to overcome. So we'll get that answer sooner rather than later. I don't think that there's an enormous rush to make this hire, as we've talked about. It's not like you need to just race someone to the podium. However, I do know ear to ground, and we'll talk about this later with Shea Dixon, there are recruits for 2021 and 2022 who are getting a little antsy about the lack of a hire here. That's one. Two, I mean, you've got signing day coming up, but then also you've already started football school, which is sort of the classroom work and the walkthrough and the install. So, I mean, the offense has now been doing that for a week, and defense in some respects is in a holding pattern. That's probably not 100% true, but as far as an install, you can't really do it until your coordinator's here. So every day you wait, you're losing an opportunity to gain ground and to shorten that gap a little bit. But more important than anything is just making sure you get the right guy. And maybe it's Daronte Jones. So Daronte Jones, defensive back coach for the Minnesota Vikings. He was in Baton Rouge, interviewed for the defensive coordinator job on Sunday. That according to a report from Adam Rittenberg at ESPN. When we know something, we'll certainly pass it along. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.